All right, next up, Grimsby. Remember, this is, at the end of the previous part I mentioned, this is where the conversion center is, and already from the beginning, you will be about to see the horrors that the Chimera inflict upon the human beings.
Well, it is called Fate's Worse Than Death, which does remind me. I'm pretty sure we saw our protagonist get infected, so why they left him
Yes,
be
as
is.
the narration seemed to ponder why Nathan Hale seems to be immune to, or resistant at the very least, to the Chimera virus. So that's one thing that we'll have to find out potentially.
Do we also get an explanation as to why they didn't drag him off to one of those conversion belts when he
No,
was
they did.
knocked out?
We're literally waking up there. The thing is that they left our entire equipment.
Really?
So anyway, I started blasting.
Not even one of those belts where you have to reclaim your equipment, just.
Nope.
Well,
These particular Chimera are act more like zombies. They do not have any ranged weapons, but there's low movement. But if they catch you, they initiate a grab attack that drains an entire attack of your health. And in order to shake them off, you have to use the 6 axis.
Why?
My favorite.
remember,
Okay.
Sony was you have
Launch
to make
title
it a
for the
showcase.
There you go. Launch title for the PS3.
Okay. We don't know how much of this was an executive mandate, but I'm willing to bet money that that part was an executive mandate.
Regardless, the final effort is still me juggling this thing like an idiot, like I'm that guy on the Nintendo presentation with with it's supposed to sound the battery.
Well, good thing for Nathan that the Chimera are fucking idiots.
Anyway,
Well, more like mindless, but go on, Drover.
when I mentioned the fact that he didn't get grabbed, I'm talking about the first time those bugs crawled into him, because after that scene,
That was
once
more
again
of a
plays
casual kind of thing because it was like a small detachment. The proper bug invasion happened at the end of the third episode of New York.
Huh.
Also, as is custom with. Oh, you're about to see these two.
I'm guessing these guys are British, given their dialect.
Yep.
Well, this takes place in England, so.
Yeah, again, Nate is the only American survivor of this unit, and that's a narrator that he has found. I don't remember exactly her name, but I know that her voice actress is Irish, so they got someone close enough for having a proper British accent. Although the credits do mention that the voice direction for the American voice actors did have a coach for the accent.
Also,
so there is that.
Also, I see someone was a Pixar fan, given her face and design.
I'm sorry, Hale. Looks like you'll have
She
to
looks
find
like the
your own way.
female chef off of Ratatouille.
77.6.
A bit.
Facially.
It was strange enough that a lone American soldier was walking around a Chimeran conversion center. But it was his eyes that were most
Ma'am, is now the time to be...
Yes, because you've noticed that was a glint, a representation of the Chimera virus.
Whoever Nathan Hale was, he wasn't entirely
Yeah, out of context, it looked like he was peeking at a posterior,
Their
just climbing up the
buttocks,
ladder, like, dude, that's not the time.
It felt like it felt like that screenshot was fading it into like his name putting right on the right side of that shot.
Anyway, what I've been just shot, those things when they explode, are power cells, which we will actually see them more as the game progresses, because the Chimera do use them for stuff like powering up their vehicles, But if you save them around, they can function pretty easily for localized explosions.
Sorry.
Go on.
Considering that this is made by the same team that did Ratchet and Clank, and that Clank's voice actor has played the main character here, is this some bad ending to a Ratchet and Clank game where everything just went to shit and everyone turned into zombies? And,
no, because it's set still on Earth, and as far as we know so far, the Ratchet and Clank games never really particularly referenced our galaxy. It could be just a Star Wars effect of saying, in a galaxy far, far away.
Not only that, but wouldn't it make more sense?
It's like those dark, gritty parodies of dark, gritty reboots where my name is Simon Jordan or something, but my friends call me Clank, and I named my gun Ratchet or something like
Wouldn't it
that.
make
Yes,
more?
Jova.
Wouldn't it make more sense for like Ratchet and Clank to be the bad ending to this universe? You know, sort of like an Adventure Time thing, where as a result of like some radioactive warfare, our world became populated by all bouts of cartoony characters who are actually mutant survivors from said war.
Don't worry about the intel. I will read it in the extra part for this game.
But
Go on. Sorry.
But yeah, going back to why this game and the series as a whole, while probably not a failure, maybe isn't exactly the most remembered, especially nowadays, I am gonna say, and again, I know we're still in the first phase, but man, am I getting like heavy Halo vibes from this. Like, I mean, not
Or
just.
Gears,
This is one of those games that is abundantly clear that it's a product of its time.
Let me put it like this. A shooter where mankind has to contend with violent aliens. Where have I heard that before? And, you know, to be
Gears
fair,
of War.
Gears of War, Halo, there were quite a
Like,
few.
like I said, in terms of, you know, potentially aesthetic and some cliches, this is more towards Gears rather than Halo. Halo is more towards the gameplay. But you have to remember also the scene, because starting from the early 2000s, roughly, up until the mid 2010s, you know, the shooter genre was dominated by basically the military stuff. There were some exceptions. There is a game that came out the same year as this, but I will mention later on, possibly at the end for comparison, which is a much better. But most of them were basically, you know, military shooters who moved very slowly, you know, and even in their plot, they were more, you know, serious. Again, even some exceptions that tried to do something different, like Gears, for example, you know, still had that kind of core attached to them.
Like,
it's not too surprising, potentially, that things will be this way. Again, this is something that might alienate because, you know, again, it's also lacking a couple of the standards of, you know, in some way you can think about it, you know, like their traditional humor. Of course, for a setting like this, it's not really appropriate. So instead, it's technically a bit more subtle in some places, but I argue the sequels improve on that because this first game in particular is a bit more bleak, and just say that the following titles do find a bit of a better balance. Not to say that to having a character that quips every 5 seconds, but to have, like I said, a couple of subtle, you know, humor elements, like a bit of dry snark rather than, you know, just having a sarcasm. Anyway, the Hedgehog grenade is a heavy anti-personnel ammunition. It is thrown like an ordinary hand grenade, and upon landing, it springs up and expands into a spiny cluster. At its kill height, the Hedgehog fires spines in all directions with enough forces to pin targets against nearby walls.
Oh.
The effect is especially deadly in confined quarters. So instead of an explosion, it's an area with effect, you know, pin grenade.
So it's kind of like a grenade version of the Needler from Halo. Got it.
Yeah, you'll be able to see it frequently in action, so don't worry, you will get a demonstration soon enough.
As harsh as it may, as harsh as
No, give me just a second, because if I recall correctly, I'm also about to get another weapon, so I'll get the intel in a second.
Alright.
There you go. The Rossmore 236. Rossmore 236 combat shotgun is employed by the British Army for base defense and urban warfare. It is noted for its potent stopping power, especially in close quarters engagement. Since the Chimeran invasion, soldiers have found the shotgun very adept in dispatching howlers. Pressing L1 discharges both barrels. This method is less efficient than firing the barrel singly, but using it effectively can sometimes mean a difference between life and death. Essentially, it combines the two types of shotgun that you can think of classic Doom. The one of the first game, which in function is a more single barrel, and also the more classic one that you find also in 2, that uses instead double barrel. The secondary fire allows you to do that. The trade-off of that is that it recoils more and it consumes, you know, 2 ammunition instead of 1. Go on, Drova.
It seems like a lot of these weapons eschew the typical bullet affair for more so shooting energy, even though the sound effects do sound more like your typical bullet sounds, but...
Well, that's because our protagonist uses a mixture between, you know, human guns and alien guns. You know, a couple of these weapons are the ones used by the Chimera, like the Bullseye, for example. So it's more of a case of, you know, Nathan Hale adapting on the battlefield and trying to use everything he can, you know, to win, which it does raise a bit the question why no one else in the British resistance tries to to use, the Chimera weapon to their advantage, because every time we see another one of the, the British soldier, they constantly still use the same carbine, all the time. So I don't know why they, improvise. We will get a section where one of the British soldiers decide to try to pilot an enemy vehicle, but it's kind of an isolated thing more than anything.
Anyway, going
I
back
don't
to what I
even-
was... Sorry, did you want to go first, Pedro?
Oh, go on.
Going back to what I was saying earlier, like, audience, as harsh as we may seem on the shooter genre, trust me, you had to be there to just know how domineering the shooter genre was. It wasn't just the fact that there was a lot of them, it was the fact that there was a lot of them, and companies were pretty much deeming almost any other genre that didn't make that same kind of money as obsolete.
That's the thing, Joe. I'll explain more detailedly later, because I don't want to, use right now to use too much time and explain later after Pedro is done. But the important part, Jova, that I learned, it's one of the big truths that I learned over time, was not so much of the saturation in itself, nor trying to cluster away from other genre, although obviously certainly that did not help. But it was more like the type of shooters that we got. Because I do argue that these days we are getting possibly even more shooters than we had back then. It's just a matter of the fact that a lot of them are actually more fun,
Oh yeah.
But I can elaborate in a second. Go on, Pedro, in the meantime.
To be fair, this is something that also depends heavily on whether or not you like a genre or not. Because for as much as we all love the '90s era of platformers, put yourself in the shoes of someone who doesn't like platformers.
Yeah.
For those people, the '90s were the equivalent of this, right? Where if you didn't like, because back then platformers were shoved down your throat left and right, and like Jova said, all the other genres were basically second thought, second nature to second thought in general. So basically, in the '90s, if you didn't like platformers, you were kind of screwed for the most part.
I'd say this definitely followed Sonic's inception. Oh, don't get me wrong. Some people were already playing Follow the Leader with Mario.
Well, that's the thing, Jova. You have to also understand the perspective of the Midweaves and Pedro, in a sense that, if you don't remember, Europe did not get a lot of RPGs until the late part of the Super Nintendo era. Sure, I think we got Phantasy Star and Shining Force for the Genesis, I think.
But we got Mystic Quest.
Yeah, that's what I will say. When it comes to Square Enix stuff, I think the first stuff that he got was Mystic Quest, which was not very flattering. Let's just say that.
We even have the Final Fantasy name on it. We just called it Mystic Quest Legend.
Did we got Terranigma? I forgot.
And hell, in terms of anything with the Final Fantasy name on it, we didn't get anything like that till 7.
Because in general, Jova, for that kind of point, Europe did got a couple of less, games in general, exported or localized at all compared to America. So what Pedro describes is a situation that usually most of us did have back in the 90s.
Yeah, I absolutely get it.
America had that situation to some extent too, just not as much as us.
Yeah, and I do want to clarify also, part of the problem with the saturation is also when quality comes into question, because I'll be fair, had a lot of the shooters been like stellar quality, like absolutely great, there would have been less complaints. Oh, don't get me wrong, people who were sick of that genre would have complained, and rightfully so, since even if every single shooter was like amazing, an industry cannot survive on one genre. It never has.
Also, regardless of that, Jova, trust me, I think it's more important about quality. And I think I'll explain just in a second, because the level is almost about to get over. There's also a couple of these obstacles, like these mines. Some of the later ones will actually become more annoying, but we're actually almost done with this level. Go on, yes?
I'm noticing that it's not just a story. The levels themselves seem like they finish almost as soon as they begin.
Again, old school, kind of like stuff like Doom. Anyway, this is important because it's explaining how the conversion works.
Guess there's something rotten in the fish at that cannery.
Once humans are infected by the Chimeran virus, they fall into a coma. The virus begins changing their bodies from the
Yeah,
inside out.
it's not just a matter of being captured. It's a complete metamorphosis that makes you lose your entire identity and sanity and turns you into a mindless husk that obeys a one mind kind of thing. Again, that's fucked up.
No, it's just like when they turn the humans into locusts.
Or like an advanced
True.
T virus from Resident Evil.
Again, I argue that the locals, that it was like an extra thing that the locals were doing it potentially just for fun, or just for the sake of it, and it was not like a primary thing they were doing. Remember, they were mostly content in just torturing and killing people, like that hero in Gears 2 or Rico's wife.
Although,
It's important to remember.
But in
that
this
it
case, it's basically one of the primary objective of the invasion, because the Chimeras have a policy of quantity over quality.
wasn't that kind of the
Yes,
case
Pedro?
in Gears 4 when locusts started turning humans into locusts?
That is
Well,
true.
well, technically it started in 2. Remember, like
The methodology
scientists-
that they used was a bit different.
Yeah.
And to be fair, Jova, Gears 4 came after this, so I wouldn't be too surprised if the coalition was inspired by this in some capacity.
Sure. It's important to remember that it was only the humans who were doing the experiments. The locusts themselves were not actually turning humans. Because remember, the whole point of the locusts, especially in Gears 2 and 3, is that they hate humans because of how much they've been forcing them underground. That's the whole twist of Gears of War 2, where turns out the war is not as black and white as it seemed, where the locusts are just bad guys and nothing else, right? You know, that was
Although
the
it
whole
is
point.
important to remember that the locusts were ultimately the asshole, since when
no.
humans...
The idea is that both of them are bad in their own way. It's just that, one of them is worse than the other.
During the second phase of the conversion process, the humans are wrapped in cocoons. This accelerates the final stages of the conversion. What emerges from the cocoon is determined by the strain of the virus.
oh my
Each
god,
Chimeran
that is like
is
Resident
created by
Evil.
a separate strain.
That too.
What we
Yeah.
call hybrids, the ones that most closely resemble humans, have the shortest
It's
gestation
like a hodgepodge of various
The more recent creatures
greedy,
take months to
dark
grow.
greedy games.
And
Not
over
just that,
multiple
like he
human
said,
bodies.
sci-fi movies of the 50s, not essentially for the cheese, but the way they structure an alien invasion. Although in
Classic
this case,
sci-fi horror.
it's portrayed in a more modern context, I suppose, in a sense of not necessarily realistic, but more gritty than what a wacky type of 50s movie would be. Anyway, I forgot to mention about these guys when they showed up in the previous part. They're called Leapers. Don't worry, among the intel I will showcase also a sort of a bestiary that has, data for each enemy, no description or anything. They travel in packs and they love to jump on you. They can also perform a grab attack similar to the other guys. It's best if you use either the shotgun or the bullseye, because they usually don't care, since they are that much. The spread doesn't particularly care about them. Anyway, I think it's a good time for me to mention this. So the whole thing that happened with the shooter genre, this comes from a combination of me testing stuff, and listening to people who were deep into it, and they lived through this kind of period. People like the channel of a guy called CV11, The major culprits and that's a big quote because they don't really consider being culpable aside from maybe 1 or 2 cases. The major culprits for the rapid changes, into the 2000s can be summed up to 4 specific cases. 1, Half-Life. Gabe Newell, since he was working at Microsoft at the time and stumbled into id Software making a port for, I think it was DOS version of Doom, which apparently included, as publicity stunt, Bill Gates with a trench coat and a pair of shotguns saying that, and I quote, "These games are becoming more realistic." Gabe Newell, in order when he created his company Valve, in order to start with a strong flagship franchise, decided to ignore John Carmack's statement about plotting a shooter game and decided to make a sort of more of a corridor, based, still with an episode-to-episode structure, but heavily ingrained with a plot, with a lot of NPCs that talk to you, and they follow a structure that you could understand. With the intentional way of, potentially railroading you and giving you only the illusion of a choice, because if you don't know anything about Half-Life, it's entirely part of a narrative. If you don't have the game, which is very easy to come by, mind you, watch the documentary that Valve released it recently. Second culprit, and technically third because it's a pair in this case, Halo and Gears. Not necessarily again to a fault, but they technically popularized a couple of mainstays, particularly the 2 weapon-only system, removing the weapon wheel that games like Quake, Doom, and Wolfenstein introduced. Removing stuff like the armor value and the medikit in order, and potentially health bars to introduce regenerating health, and instead the border screen of the screen turns red with veins to represent that, which, while has a cool effect and I guess for quote-unquote immersion, it's not really that indicative when you really get down to it, and it's more of an approximation. Gears also ideally, put a bit of a standard in slowing down things. It wasn't just a matter, of just going around and gunning people and using your speed to actually avoid being shot. Now it was more of a thing of getting methodical and getting behind a cover in order to wait your turn, potentially to simulate more, a military tactic rather than, having to be just a one-man army in a, set of arenas to fuck things around. And fourth, the major culprit in all of this, the ultimate one that did basically the coup de grace, and the one that I don't think, is as most exclusive compared to the others. You guessed it, the Call of Duty franchise. It ultimately, aside because of its, its notoriety, it ultimately cemented the idea of everything becoming super brown, super slow, with limited, arsenal, because multiplayer needed to be balanced, but single player had to reflect that, regenerating health, very poor aesthetics and boring plot. Hold on, I'll wait until
that was a
this is over
super
because
quick level.
most of them are, like I said, 10 minutes, but this is a more important part of the conversion process.
The Chimeran conversion process is known as the birthing chamber. The cocoons are opened and new Chimera are born. In the case of hybrids, a cooling apparatus.
This is important because, the Chimera function with a hypermetabolism. In order to prevent their overheating, they have this, refrigerating apparatus strapped onto their backs. This is important because this applies into the gameplay. There is location-based damage on those things on the back. If you manage to hit them enough but not the body, the Chimera will still die, just in a different way. The thing is that because of the way the gameplay is structured, you don't really need it. It will be more exploited in the next couple of games. But it's still a nice touch in order to vary things down. Anyway, my point is, because of what happened with Call of Duty, almost every shooter, afterward, like Medal of Honor, Battlefield, and so on and so forth, had to be, more desaturated, more with a variant of gray and brown, more slow, limited weapons, more boring weapons as a whole. And games a bit like this were more the exception than anything. By the time of the early 2010s, and I mean the very early 2010s, if you really wanted a shooter kind of like the old school, like with Doom, your options were very limited to either Borderlands and not really willing to, give the benefit of the doubt to people like Randy Pitchford. I'm sorry. Or Bulletstorm, which is just a bit better, but not even that much.
As much as I may not... Sorry.
The first major game that managed to change things out was a remake of The Rise of the Triad in 2013, which tried to be very old school because of that. But ultimately, the one that as we all know, that brought things back was, of course, Doom 2016. The big grandfather of the shooter genre literally came back from retirement and slapped everyone in the face, telling that shooters can actually be fun again. Oh, actually, let's check the menu, Dweebs. For the very best fish, Cornish Pressquid, Dover Sole, Sea Bass, Monkfish, Swordfish, Halibut, and Lemon Sole. What do you think, Dweebs?
I thought it said hogfish for a second there. I'd try that.
Truly the greatest British dining.
Okay, with that, honestly, some of the options on that menu makes me look like this bar was just deserted before the outbreak happened.
Damn.
Also, a small note, because I'm curious on this thing, you might be helping on this one, Jova, because this is mostly a stereotype associated to the Wild West, I guess, originated mostly there. The idea of the shotgun behind the bartender counter, like, I get the purpose, of course, the personal defense in order to stop fights, but why specifically the shotgun and not just a random rifle?
Well, the shotguns were often best for relatively close range stuff, and well, in a place like a bar where people would get drunk and rowdy, they would tend to get physical. So the shotgun would often send the best message in that regard.
Okay, then. I'll talk more about this specific shotgun later, but some of you wanted to go on.
Right, you were talking about Call of Duty. Much as I don't like that was the case, I absolutely get why it was. Like, Call of Duty was a juggernaut. Like, even when the shooter genre started dying in popularity, Call of Duty still remains supreme. Like, it's only been recently that Activision's BS has finally caught up with them regarding Call of Duty.
Mostly because of the multiplayer. A lot of these games live and die by the multiplayer, including this one, which I will talk more about it later. We will have the time to discuss about it. So one of the reasons why, despite, what I just said about Call of Duty was still popular was mostly because at the end of the day it was very functional, especially in a system like the Xbox 360, particularly where the main idea that you could play these big matches, online with friends, and chat and having, coordinated tactics in big scenarios, something that Doom technically had already started, but COD was essentially, amplifying, it was kind of seen as a big novelty and a way to create a community, for lack of a term.
And to be fair, from what I can recall, they had relatively good narratives. From what I can recall, anyway.
Yes, Pedro?
I'm actually checking this game's RPCS free wiki page. This game requires quite a beefy PC to be emulated properly, especially if you use the unlock FPS. But the unlock FPS patch will allow the game to run at 60 FPS. However, it says your warning affects bullseye trap physics.
It's a specific mechanic that I will mention later. Don't worry, Pedro.
So basically, you can play the game at 60 FPS. Be warned, however, it does apparently change some of the physics here and there. Apparently,
I don't even know, because I don't think Wikipedia mentions it, but I don't know what engine this is using. Doesn't seem to be Unreal to me.
Now, usually Insomniac uses their own inner tech.
True, remember, but for Ratchet & Clank, it was something that Naughty Dog gave to them. This doesn't seem anything in particular I can think of. It doesn't seem to be based on the Doom 3 engine, Doom was called E-Tech 3, I think. It's not Unreal 3, doesn't seem to be. Again, don't worry, I'll read this later on, we can just ignore it for now. At the time I was recording this, I was undecided if I wanted to read it or not. So I really don't know what this is using, because for games that came out around the same time, like Dead Space, those did use actually, a custom engine that was created by, the developers. So I don't know actually if it's the case. That's a weird thing. a lot of information about this particular series is not really easy to come by, like I hinted in the previous part,
Oh.
for no real reason. Again, IMDb and Wikipedia give contradicting informations about the directors and writers about these games.
I
Yes, Jova?
have found a site called IGDB.com, which apparently lists game engines used for games. According
on.
to it, the engine used for Resistance Fall of Man was an engine called the Insomniac engine,
Oh, a custom made from them. Okay.
which was also
yeah,
used
that's
for Resistance 2 Collector's Edition, the Resistance Collection, Stormland, Resistance 2, and Resistance 3. So it's
Well,
an
yeah,
engine
yeah.
that's
I
been
mean,
in their
Sony's-
usage for a while.
Oh yeah, Sony's first-party games. I'm pretty sure all of them use their own custom tech that they have. I don't think. I can't really think of a first-party Sony game that uses the Unreal Engine 4 or even the Unity
Well,
engine.
Chris Gone used it.
Did it?
There was a
actually-
question, I don't know.
I haven't actually played it yet, so.
The
let
wiki
me check.
specifies it as Insomniac Engine version 1.0, so there could have been.
See, yeah, I guess it
upgraded
was probably
versions.
again. It was a thing, for this particular era, like we mentioned in I think Homefront, because it was affecting the Time Splitters developers. But it was a case where a lot of studios who had worked with SD stuff, they were forced to either adapt or die. So I guess it was a thing of with a budget to back them up, they actually built their own custom engine.
Well, how about this, Joe? Since you're on that site, what engine does Days Gone use?
Let me see. Days Gone uses. Unreal Engine 4.
There you go.
Then. See, the thing is, the reason, like for example, like Plague Tale uses their own, as opposed to created a whole new engine specifically for those games, especially considering how they have to deal with a shit ton of rats on screen.
Mm-hmm.
So one thing that's also important to remember is that developers making their own engine usually makes the development process much easier for them because they can custom make the engine to fit their specific needs for that game.
And they don't have as much, hindrance on the budget because, otherwise we need to pay some royalties to
Yeah.
people like Epic Games.
Exactly.
Whereas-
So it can. It's kind of like something similar. Like there was actually, according to some people in the know, apparently one of the reasons the development of Fable is taking so long is because apparently Playground Games was having trouble working with making an entire engine and everything because apparently Microsoft is forcing them to use their own tech instead of getting Unreal Engine involved. I mean, with the Coalition, they make the exception there because remember the whole reason Gears was created to begin with was to be a showcase for the Unreal Engine. So that one still is safe from that mandate. Although, who knows, maybe one day that will change too.
That would be just. I mean, look, maybe they could make a good engine, but yeah, and you know what? Granted, probably only the most specific people who meta dive into that stuff will know. But it
Remember,
does
the
feel
whole reason-
it does feel a bit like sacrilege to do a Gears game without an Unreal Engine.
Obviously, but that's the thing. Remember, Playground's engine was made specifically for racing simulators. So now they're having to adapt that engine to Fable, even though this engine was not made for this kind of game at all.
A racing simulator engine for real.
Let's compare this to what Guerrilla Games did. When Guerrilla Games made Horizon Zero Dawn, they created their own new super duper engine called the Decima engine that Kojima also uses for Death Stranding 1 and 2, right? So that's different. But apparently, based on what we know, since Microsoft will not allow them to just use Unreal Engine 4 or something like that, they have to try to adapt their racing simulator technology to fit the RPG format now. And that's why apparently the development of Fable is not going great.
Like,
Granted, maybe that was a couple years ago. Maybe things have improved since then. Who knows?
It's also It's also the reason why Multiversus did took a couple of months of sabbatical because they literally changed the engine to Unreal 5 instead.
that seems like a needlessly that seems like a
Okay.
needlessly narrow bridge.
Okay,
point.
yeah, I was about to say, the game sometimes loves to troll you by having these narrow stuff and forcing you to do some platforming. What the fuck?
And in first person, where you can't see where your feet are.
Like, it's
Come on.
it's
I
not.
guess technically, it's more like going through a narrow thing.
It
rather
will
than
be also
platforming itself.
proper platforming later on. But
Okay.
my point is, it feels very unnecessary. It's not even
no,
a
it
case of
is.
punishing you by killing you. It's just a thing.
I
Anyway,
was able to make it to the surface and summon a rescue. Flying into the Chimeran territory was always dangerous, but we had to risk it. Hale made it out shortly after. I looked for any further signs of conversion. Fever, nervous movement, paranoia. There was nothing. Just the gold-colored eyes. We flew directly to Manchester.
there you go, Dweebs. The next part, we're actually gonna go to Manchester.
Da, 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 da.
Kinda.
Okay. For the next part, I will try to think of the most funny Manchester zombie jokes.
Oh, don't worry, Dweebs. There will be something that you can tell in the next part. I'll just leave it for you to say. But again, for the time being, at the very least, Nate has both rescued himself and that British commander. So see you for the next part where we properly have the invasion of Manchester. Yeah.
See you then.
See ya.